If you're going to talk about comfort books, you have to be wearing a cardigan. I didn't write the rules, I just follow them. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am taking the Comfort Reads book tag. This felt like the perfect time to do it. It is autumn, it is getting cozy weather time, it's cardigan season. I don't think I've taken this off for about a week. I spotted this tag on Megan's Reading Revelations and I will leave her video in the description box below. But this felt like such a good way to get kind of cozy vibes for autumn and really kind of kickstart the season. Prompt 1 is The Kettle's On, a book of steadfast comfort that is always there for you, makes any day better, like a cup of tea or your favorite warm drink. For this, it is The Babysitter's Club by Anne M. Martin. This is one of the summer specials, but there are like 130 or something books in the main series alone, and you've also got the mystery series, and you have also got Babysitter's Little Sister. So there are maybe like 200 books that you can go through and follow the journey of these 7 teenagers who live in a town in Connecticut and have started up their own babysitting enterprise to make money and to help out the parents in their community. Now, I'm not a parent and I never will be, but I don't know if I would leave my toddler in the care of a 13-year-old, but the kind of scrapes that the girls get into, and also a lot of the representation that you see in the books. For example, there are discussions of racism, there are discussions of divorce, of bereavement, there are discussions of physical illness, of chronic illnesses. It's the book where I first heard about the term diabetes, and I think that that's something I'm always going to be grateful to for the Babysitter's Club, because without that I probably wouldn't have heard about it for such a long time. This book really opened my eyes to a lot of things that were on in the world, and I absolutely love it. I go back to them when I'm in a kind of a slump and I just need something to kind of kickstart my reading again, because they're short, because they're snappy, because they're probably about 200 pages, but every single book is different. Every single one of the Babysitter's Club is different, and I just love going back into their little world. Question 2 is Grandmother's Quilt, a book that reminds you of a loved one or a comforting book that was given to you or read aloud by somebody held dear to you. This is The BFG by Roald Dahl. I remember when I was maybe 4 or 5, I used to have this kind of big Roald Dahl treasury. It was pink, it was a hardback book, and it had 3 Roald Dahl stories in it, the complete unabridged versions. You had the BFG, you had Matilda, and you had George's Marvelous Medicine. Matilda, I've talked about a lot on this channel. It's the first book that I ever read cover to cover by myself. I think I would have been about 7 when I started that book by myself. But the BFG is something a little bit more special for me. My dad and I are the 2 big readers in my family, and when I was younger, my dad used to read the BFG to me, taking on the voice of the narrator and of the BFG himself, and then I would read out the parts of Sophie. And I think that this whole thing, A, brought me a lot closer to my dad, B, is a really nice childhood memory, but C, is probably a big reason why I love reading. I do credit a lot of that to Matilda, because there was that self of accomplishment from having finished a whole chapter book by yourself when you're only like 6 or 7 years old. But I vividly remember my dad standing at the head of my bunk beds and I was on the top bunk of the bed and reading out Sophie's parts aloud with him as he was reading out the parts of the BFG, and him helping me to pronounce words that I had never seen written down before or hadn't experienced. And it's definitely a memory that I'm going to hold for probably the rest of my life. Question 3, Warm Spices, a book with particularly vivid prose or imagery, a story comforting in its richness, depth, or vibrance. And for this one, I'm going to go with another children's classic, and that is the Winnie the Pooh stories by A.A. Milne. I've only really read one of them. I think it's just Winnie the Pooh, it's called. I think it's the first Winnie the Pooh book. It could have been like The 100-Acre Wood, or Winnie the Pooh in the 100-Acre Wood, or And the 100-Acre Wood, but it's definitely the first book of Winnie the Pooh stories. Winnie the Pooh also has a quite big place in my family. He was really big in my brother's life when my little brother was younger. And he's always going to be this kind of well-renowned and well-respected figure in our family. But I hadn't actually read the books until I was maybe 26 or 7. I listened to the audiobook of the first book and I was just blown away by it. It's so vivid. You can really imagine yourself walking through the 100-acre wood and interacting with Tigger and with Rabbit and with Owl and all of the other animals that live in the 100-acre wood. You can just picture yourself sitting there watching Pooh and Piglet interact with each other or go on the adventures that they go on. And it's such a comforting and warm book. I absolutely recommend it. Question 4 is Candlelight, a book that keeps you going or encourages you when things get dark. And for this one, I'm not going to go with a book, but more so an entire author. Matt Haig. I know Matt can be a little bit of a Marmite person. I know Matt can be very kind of love him or hate him. I'm not always a big fan of some of the things that he does or some of the things that he has said, but I have to admit that some of his books have gotten me through some pretty sticky situations. I will always credit and I will always recommend people read Reasons to Stay Alive, because if you are going through a very difficult patch in your life, if things are starting to seem a little bit overwhelming, I definitely recommend going through Reasons to Stay Alive, because it will genuinely give you a little bit more hope. It will give you a little bit more comfort. The Midnight Library is one of my favorite of his fiction books, but it does have a kind of a feeling of his non-fiction. Again, some of the story is a little bit out there, some of it is a little bit too far-fetched for me to fully enjoy it, but it is a really great read in my opinion. I also have a copy of The Comfort Book, but I haven't actually read this one yet. It's another one of his non-fiction books. It's his latest non-fiction book. I think it came out last year, but I haven't actually gotten around to it yet. But I do know that if times get tough again and if the world is starting to look a little bit more difficult, then the book is there to help me out. Question 5 is Laugh Medicine, a book that makes you laugh out loud or grin widely, coming to the rescue on the gloomiest days. I have to say Parsnips Buttered by Joe Lycett here. This book is just laughter in pages. Joe Lycett's one of my favorite comedians in the UK at the moment. He has just got this kind of devil-may-care attitude, and he always wants to go around and kind of help people out and make the world a better place for them to live in. He has a show called Joe Lycett's Got Your Back on Channel 4, where he goes around and discusses with companies how they seem to be kind of swindling money out of people, or that they are performing illegal practices, for example, and I absolutely love his approach to that. Quite a lot of his comedy is about the emails that he writes to these companies and the personas that he takes on to write them. And a lot of Parsnips Buttered is based on these emails. It's got chapters of him discussing having a parking fine from parking in a taxi rank, for example, or like there's loads of stories in there that are just so goddamn funny. There's no other way to describe it. If you are in any way a fan of Joe Lycett's comedy, you will absolutely adore that book. Question 6 is In Bed All Day. You've got your warm drink, you've got a cozy blanket. What do you read when you are curled up in bed all day, or maybe just for a couple of hours? The one genre that brings me comfort again and again and again is a steamy contemporary romance. I discovered it back in the pandemic. The first one that I ever read was The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, and it just went from there. I have discovered so many new favorites. I have found new avenues that I want to explore with contemporary romance, new tropes that I didn't think I was into, and then I read it and it turns out I'm super into them. It kind of also gives me a little bit of hope for other relationships that might be out there in the future when the last one that I was in didn't end very well. It gives me hope that there is something better out there. It might not be here at the moment, but it will be out there in the future whenever I'm ready for it. And reading these books and seeing people who have gone through breakups and then find somebody else and they always get along really well, it always just gives me a little bit of hope. Question 7 is Endless Comfort, a book that brings you solace no matter how many times you read it. For this one, I have to go for The Princess Diaries by Meg Cabot. I associated with Mia so much when I was a teenager, I genuinely thought I was her, apart from the not running a small European country. Mia and I both had a parent or a step-parent who was a teacher, who was a maths teacher, who taught us maths, and it was our worst subject. Maths is by far my worst subject. I struggle counting to 20 if I've got my shoes on. But there was other little aspects of her life that also resonated with me. Mia is an eldest child. Okay, Rocky in there is like 15 or 16 years younger than Mia, whereas my brother and I are only 5 years apart, but still an eldest daughter. I also am quite a big lover of the English language, and English was one of my best subjects in school, whereas it was also the same for her. And also, I didn't have a very wide friendship group when I was in my school years, but Mia also has the same thing, but is quite highly respected by her school friends. I felt like so much solace and I found so much comfort in Mia's life and in the pages of Mia's book that it just kind of didn't make me feel as alone when I was reading those books. Question 8 is Portable Hope, a book that restores your faith in humanity, faith in life, faith in yourself. A book that says it's going to be okay, the world is full of good things and tomorrow will be better. If you haven't read the Heartstopper series yet, go immediately correct that and then we can be friends again. I adore these books. I did come to them a little bit late. I did first start reading them when the Netflix series came out and I was just hooked on them because it does give so much comfort and it does give so much hope for the future and it does give so much hope that the world is a more accepting place and tolerant place than it would have been 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I don't know if a book like this, if it had come out maybe 10 or 15 years previously, I don't know if it would have been as well accepted by some people in the world. This is the story of Nick and Charlie, who are two teenage schoolboys in England. Charlie is trying out for Nick's rugby club. They start to strike up a friendship as part of this kind of sports participation that they've got together. And then the friendship starts turning to more for them. Charlie is already out as gay in the school, but Nick is just figuring out his sexuality. He's not sure what these feelings that he's got for Charlie mean for him. He's not sure what label he falls under, if he falls under any at all, what label he wants to put onto himself. It's such a wonderful book, and I know that there are so many teenagers out there who are going to read this and see themselves in the pages of this book and just cry tears for how much they resonate with it. If it had been out when I was a teenager, it would have helped me make so much more sense of who I was as a person, what my sexuality was. It would have helped me kind of realize that a little bit earlier than I actually did. But I really hope that everybody who needs this book finds it in their hands one day. Question 9 is a basket for your neighbour. Just as it's lovely to be comforted by books, it can also be really nice to pass the comfort along. Imagine you're putting together a cozy, comforting basket for your neighbour or a friend or a loved one. Which books would you include? So, of course, first of all, we're going to go for Heartstopper for the reasons that I just mentioned in the previous question, that it will open a lot of doors for a lot of people, that there's a lot of people who may see themselves in the pages of this book, no matter what age they may be, because some people do discover their sexuality quite later on in their lives, and if anybody is in that boat, it might be a really great read for them. But also I'm going to recommend the I Heart series by Lindsay Kalk. Take a drink, I've mentioned it again. This book has quite a lot of comfort in it. It did give me quite a lot of comfort when I had to restart my life basically at 29 years old, because that's what the character of this book does. She basically restarts her whole life after a relationship breaks up. She moves to a new city, she finds love, she finds a new career, she finds new friends. She basically rediscovers who she is. And I absolutely love following Angela throughout her adventures around the world, because this book series is not just set in New York, but also in Hollywood, Vegas, Paris, London, Hawaii. There are so many places around the world that you can discover from the comfort of your own chair without having to go anywhere else. And it is such a wonderful book. Some of them have not aged super well, but the majority of them are a really great and comforting read. Finally, question 10, a walk through the woods. Though we'd like to stay curled up indoors with the books forever, we have got to venture into the world again sometime. A walk in the woods always helps me to feel refreshed, so tell us about a book with beautiful nature writing or a book that restores your peace. The first one that came to my mind here was Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. I haven't read this book in such a long time, but it is an absolute childhood standout favourite for me. Tom's Midnight Garden is set during the Blitz. It is in, I think, London in the 1940s during World War II. And Tom, whose younger brother Peter has contracted mumps, has been sent away to live with his aunt and uncle who live right across the country. His room feels a little bit kind of stifling. He doesn't really get along well with his aunt and uncle, and he just wants a little bit more adventure, wants a little bit more excitement. When he is in bed one night, he hears the clock downstairs striking 13, and I know that that sounds a little bit like the start of 1984, but I promise this book is a bit more uplifting. Tom goes downstairs, he opens one of the doors to the backyard where like all the rubbish bins are held, and instead he finds this absolutely stunning garden with fountains, with benches, with rose bushes with tulips everywhere. And he is just so surprised at the fact that his aunt and uncle have kept this from him this whole time. He goes and tries to show them it, but during the day, the garden has disappeared and it's just the rubbish bins again. But at night, he hears the clock striking again, goes downstairs, and the garden has come back. Not only is the garden back, but there is also a young woman called Hetty walking around the garden. She's the same age as Tom, and they strike up the most beautiful friendship. I absolutely adore this book. Like I said, I haven't gone back and read it in such a long time. But if I do feel like I need a little bit of comfort, if the winter days are getting a little bit too grey, too depressing, and I need a little bit burst of excitement, a burst of colour, I'm definitely going to go and pick up Tom's Midnight Garden. Those were my answers to the Comfort Reads book tag. What books bring you a whole lot of comfort when you are reading them? Do you have any comforting authors? What do you do when you need to have a little bit of comfort? If you can't think of anything that you would like to say, then just leave the scarf emoji, because there is nothing more comforting than wrapping yourself in a huge blanket scarf when you're going out in cold weather. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.